Get off my yacht. The words hit like glass shattering in water. Conversation stopped. Laughter froze halfway through the air. Every sound on the deck folded into silence, leaving only the pulse of the ocean against the hull. Vanessa Cole stood tall, posture sharp enough to cut. Her silver dress caught the light, but her eyes carried something colder, certainty. She didn't raise her voice because she didn't have to. The quiet around her did the work. Across from her, Dr. Maya Washington said nothing. She stood near the railing, the night wind lifting a few strands of her hair, the black fabric of her dress still as stone. One hand rested lightly on the rail, the other hung calm by her side. No fear, no confusion, just stillness. The crowd watched. Phones tilted discreetly. No one spoke, but their silence screamed curiosity. Who was this woman being told she didn't belong? Vanessa stepped closer, perfume slicing through salt air. "This is a private event," she said evenly. "You don't belong here." Maya's gaze didn't waver. She blinked once, slow, deliberate. The space between them filled with everything unsaid. Years of judgment, invisible rules, the kind of quiet hostility that wears a human face. And somewhere beneath the music that had died too soon, something shifted. The humiliation Vanessa expected never came. What replaced it was tension, unspoken, electric, waiting for the next breath to decide who truly belonged on that deck. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed. Not curious eyes, not kind ones. Calculating. The kind of eyes that measure a person's presence like a problem that needs solving. Dr. Maya Washington felt the weight of dozens of stares pressing against her shoulders, not one of them offering welcome. On the surface, the guests pretended to carry on. A couple at the bar raised their glasses too quickly. A man in a blue suit tilted his wrist, checking a watch he hadn't really needed to check. A woman in a crimson dress bent toward her date, whispering behind her manicured hand. The kind of whisper designed to be overheard. It wasn't words of kindness. It was dismissal in its purest form. Phones hovered in palms at chest level. To anyone else, it looked like people texting or scrolling. But Maya knew. The glow of those screens wasn't for Instagram feeds. It was for her. Someone was recording. Someone was waiting for the humiliation to unfold live, so they could broadcast it before dessert was even served. The music hadn't stopped. Not technically. But even the saxophone's notes seemed thinner now. Background noise to the silence growing on deck. There is a kind of hush that happens in these moments. Not a silence of peace, but a silence of judgment. Every guest stood still, listening without moving, craving the drama, but refusing to intervene. And still, Maya did not flinch. She didn't step back. She didn't argue. She let them look. That calm, that stillness, it only amplified the tension. Vanessa Cole wanted her gone, but the crowd? They wanted a show, and Maya's restraint was somehow more powerful than an outburst. Think about this. Have you ever felt every pair of eyes in a room silently judging your right to exist there? If you know that feeling, type "I know" in the comments, because the way a room looks at you can cut deeper than any words. And yet Maya wasn't broken. She was calculating too, waiting for the perfect moment. She didn't need to announce herself. Dr. Maya Washington was already commanding the deck without a single word. The glow of the yacht's lights brushed against her black dress, fabric tailored to fit like it had been made for this exact night. No sequins, no glitter. Just quiet elegance, the kind that makes noise without saying a thing. Her hair framed her face in soft waves, her posture unbending yet graceful. One hand rested on the railing, the other hung relaxed at her side, fingers steady, unmoved by the storm brewing around her. She didn't fidget, didn't shift her weight nervously. She stood still, shoulders squared, chin high, like a monument refusing to erode under the tide. To the crowd, she was an enigma. Some had seen her slip onto the yacht earlier, just after sunset. She hadn't rushed, hadn't sought attention. She'd blended, quietly observing, as though the yacht itself was just another room she was already familiar with. But now, under the cold spotlight of Vanessa's words, her presence felt undeniable. A man near the piano tilted his head, staring longer than the others. Something in Maya's composure unsettled him. She didn't look like a woman who had accidentally crashed a party. She looked like a woman evaluating it, measuring the people, the atmosphere, the very walls as if deciding whether they met her standards. And the truth was, she had been here before. Maybe not this exact yacht, not this exact crowd, but she had known these looks, these tests, these silent verdicts her entire life. Every room like this had tried to tell her the same story. You don't belong. But Maya had long since learned how to rewrite the ending. The music wavered. The murmurs swelled. Still, she remained, black dress gleaming against the gold light, eyes calm, unyielding. If Vanessa expected her to shrink, she had chosen the wrong woman. Because Maya Washington did not come to disappear. She came to be seen. The yacht wasn't silent anymore. It was buzzing. Not with music, not with laughter, but with the low hum of whispered judgment. The kind of whispers that sliced deeper than shouts ever could. A woman in a crimson silk dress leaned closer to her companion, her lips barely moving. Yet her words drifted sharp across the deck. She's not even dressed for this. Another guest, a man in a navy jacket, with a pocket square folded too perfectly, shook his head and muttered, "This is going to be awkward." Neither of them realized their whispers carried farther than they thought. Or maybe they did, and they wanted Maya to hear. Eyes flicked up and down her body, cataloging every detail. The shoes, the jewelry, the way she carried herself. To them it wasn't admiration, it was arithmetic. They were calculating what she could afford, what she could prove, whether she was worthy of standing among them. Phones glowed brighter now. Someone pretended to scroll, but their camera lens was trained on Maya's face. Another guest tilted their phone slightly, a live stream counter climbing in the corner of the screen. They weren't intervening, they were curating content. And in the middle of it all, Maya stood unmoved, her breathing steady, her shoulders set. She had faced this chorus before, voices that didn't shout, but whispered her out of the room. And yet she remained, because here's the truth. Sometimes silence is louder than any word, and right now the silence of the crowd was screaming, "You don't belong." Let me ask you, have you ever walked into a room and felt judged before you even opened your mouth? If you know that feeling, type "I know" in the comments right now. Because for Maya Washington, this wasn't the first time, but it would be the last time anyone underestimated her here. For a moment, Maya's eyes shifted, not to Vanessa, not to the crowd, but past them, toward the dark horizon where the city lights blinked across the water. And in that flicker of stillness, memories surfaced. 10 years ago, she had stood just a few piers away from this very spot, but not as a guest. Back then, she wore a grease-stained apron, sleeves rolled up, standing behind a stack of dishes, taller than her arms could comfortably hold. She worked the late shifts in the dockside kitchen, scrubbing until her hands cracked under the sting of soap and salt. From the kitchen window, she had watched yachts like this one glide out into the night, carrying people dressed like gods in silk and pearls. To her, they were distant, untouchable, an entire world that didn't even know she existed. She remembered the sting of sweat in her eyes as the chefs barked orders, the way the floor manager barely acknowledged her name, and the silent vow she made with each broken plate she replaced. One day, I will not just step onto one of those boats, I will own the reason they sail. And she kept that vow. Brick by brick, deal by deal, sleepless night by sleepless night. She built companies that moved goods across oceans, contracts that those very yachts depended on. It was her logistics firm that carried 70% of their imported luxuries, the very champagne chilling in their buckets tonight. Now, standing on this deck, she wasn't the girl peering out from a kitchen window. She was the woman who had paid for the glass the champagne was poured into. The whispers tried to pull her back into that kitchen, but Maya had already walked out. For good. The heels struck the teak deck like a gavel. Sharp, precise, unyielding. Vanessa Cole advanced toward Maya with the confidence of someone convinced the room belonged to her. In her hand, she carried a silver clipboard, sleek, polished, and monogrammed with her initials. It wasn't paperwork tonight. It was a weapon. Her smile had shifted into something thinner, something honed. She wasn't smiling to welcome. She was smiling to warn. The guests nearby could sense it too. They leaned subtly closer without daring to move their feet, hungry for confrontation. Even the music seemed to falter. The saxophone's notes strangled midair. Vanessa stopped just a foot too close, invading Maya's space deliberately. She glanced down at the clipboard, then up at Maya, as though measuring whether this woman was a puzzle piece that didn't fit. "We run a very exclusive list," she said softly, her voice like sugar mixed with vinegar. "I'm sure you understand." The words weren't meant for Maya alone. They were delivered loud enough for half the deck to hear. And that was the point. Humiliation wasn't effective if it stayed private. Vanessa wanted witnesses. She flipped through the pages of her list with exaggerated precision, though anyone watching closely could tell she wasn't actually reading. Her eyes kept darting upward, checking whether Maya had begun to shrink. But Maya didn't move. She stayed still, posture firm, eyes calm, unblinking. That composure unsettled Vanessa. It was supposed to be easy. And yet, Vanessa pressed on. The clipboard snapped shut with a metallic click. The crowd leaned in. Something was about to happen. Because when people can't find a reason to erase you quietly, they look for a stage to do it loudly. And Vanessa was setting the stage. Vanessa Cole's voice rose above the hum of conversation, clear enough to slice through the night air. "That's strange," she announced, tilting her clipboard like it carried a final verdict. "I don't seem to have you listed." The words dripped with false surprise, but anyone who listened closely could hear the performance in her tone. This wasn't confusion. This was theater. She wanted everyone on that deck to hear her pronouncement, to watch her put Maya Washington in her place. Gasps fluttered from nearby tables. A smirk curved across the lips of a man in a tailored gray suit. Somewhere behind, a woman stifled a laugh into her wineglass. Laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to cut deep. The kind of laughter that said, "We knew it. She doesn't belong." Vanessa's smile sharpened, cruel and polished. "Perhaps you were meant to be on the service crew," she suggested sweetly, projecting her words so the entire upper deck could catch them. The line landed like a dagger. Heads turned, someone chuckled outright, and the sound spread like a ripple. For a heartbeat, Maya's chest tightened. Not from shame, but from recognition. She had heard variations of this line her entire life, always said with the same poisoned courtesy, always meant to remind her that she was an intruder. But here's the difference. Maya wasn't the girl from the kitchen anymore. She was the woman who had signed contracts worth more than the yacht they stood on. And she wasn't about to let Vanessa's stage become her cage. Still, Vanessa's smirk grew wider, feeding on the silence of the crowd. She thought she had won. Now let me ask you, have you ever been mistaken, dismissed, or reduced to something less than you are, just because of how you look? If you've lived through that, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0. Let's see how many of us have been there. Because for Maya, this wasn't humiliation. This was ignition. The chuckles hadn't even faded when Maya moved. Slow, deliberate, unhurried. She slipped her hand into her clutch, her movements so precise it almost felt like choreography. Every eye tracked her fingers as they withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold lettering. It caught the light as if it had been waiting for this very moment. She held it up between them. Not aggressively, not defensive, just calmly, as though she were presenting evidence that needed no explanation. "This is my invitation," Maya said, her voice smooth, measured. It wasn't raised, but it carried across the deck with effortless clarity. For a moment, a hush rippled through the crowd. The smirks softened, the laughter stalled. The paper was formal, official, impossible to mistake for anything less. A few guests craned their necks to see. One man near the bar whispered, "That looks legit." Another woman frowned, suddenly unsure of the joke she just shared. But Vanessa didn't take it. She didn't even reach for it. Her eyes darted down, skimmed the gold seal for half a heartbeat, then snapped back up. She waved her hand dismissively, her smile frozen into something brittle. "That must be a mistake," she replied, her tone dripping condescension. "This is a private event." The crowd shifted, uneasy. They saw the invitation. They knew it was real. Yet Vanessa's refusal twisted the air, making Maya's presence feel like a crime of existence rather than a matter of fact. The envelope didn't waver in Maya's hand. She didn't pull it back, didn't drop her gaze. She just held it there, quiet, steady, a silent reminder of truth. But Vanessa wasn't done. She wanted spectacle. not evidence. And the clipboard was no longer enough. Because when facts don't serve the powerful, they reach for force. And that's when Vanessa called for security. Vanessa's smile never reached her eyes. With a flick of her wrist, she snapped the clipboard shut, the metallic click echoing like a gavel across the deck. Then she batted her manicured fingers toward the crew, her voice pitched high enough for everyone to hear. Security, she called, each syllable laced with false kindness. We can't have unverified guests tonight. The word security didn't carry the promise of safety. It carried the weight of shame. It wasn't about rules. It was about spectacle, about dragging Maya out under the judgmental gaze of the wealthy and powerful, making her exit a performance as cruel as the accusation itself. From the far end of the deck, a tall guard appeared. His steps were hesitant, his eyes flicking between Vanessa and Maya as if already unsure. But he walked forward anyway, his uniform crisp against the glimmering lights. The crowd hushed, as though waiting for the curtain to rise. Wine glasses hovered midair. Forks paused above plates of halibut and caviar. Guests leaned in, balancing curiosity with silent complicity. They weren't going to intervene. They weren't going to stop it. They were going to watch. Vanessa's smile sharpened. She gestured toward Maya with a tilt of her head. Please escort her off the deck. Now. The words hung heavy, a verdict passed without trial. And though Maya's invitation still rested firm in her hand, the laughter from earlier replayed in the silence, fueling Vanessa's performance. But Maya did not move. She stood taller instead, shoulders back, eyes calm, her hands steady, not clenched, not shaking. She wasn't giving Vanessa the reaction she wanted. And in that stillness, the power began to shift. Because sometimes refusing to move is louder than shouting. The guard's footsteps were steady but reluctant, each one echoing louder than it should have on the polished teak deck. And with every step he took toward Maya, the crowd tightened its circle. Not physically, they didn't move closer, but their eyes did. Their attention wrapped around the moment like a net, trapping her in its center. A woman in pearls raised her phone higher, pretending to text, though the camera's red recording dot betrayed her. A young man near the bar angled his device so smoothly, you'd think he'd practiced for this. Live streaming the humiliation of another human being as if it were tonight's scheduled entertainment. The counter of hearts and shocked face emojis climbed silently in his corner. The whispers multiplied. She should just leave quietly. It's not worth the scene. Honestly, what did she expect? Each murmur was another weight pressing against Maya, an invisible verdict piling up before she had spoken a single defense. But the cruelest silence was from those who said nothing. The ones who knew this was wrong, who shifted uncomfortably in their tuxedos and gowns, but refused to break the spell of complicity. Their silence screamed louder than words ever could. We won't help you. And yet Maya remained still. She didn't step back. She didn't lower her eyes. If anything, her spine seemed to lengthen, her presence expanding even as Vanessa tried to shrink it. She looked not like a woman cornered, but like a woman waiting, measured, intentional. The crowd, without realizing it, leaned closer. They thought they were waiting to watch her fall. What they didn't know was that they were about to witness her rise. Because dignity, when displayed against hostility, has a way of turning spectators into believers. The guard was only a step away now. His hand hovered near her elbow, hesitant, unsure if he should touch her or wait for the final nod from Vanessa. The hostess stood straighter, smugness etched across her face, already tasting the satisfaction of this public expulsion. The crowd leaned in, hungry for an ending. And then it happened. Maya lifted her chin, slowly, purposefully, her eyes locked with the guards, not pleading, not defiant, but calm. A calm so profound it felt unnatural in a storm like this. And then she spoke. 5 words, soft, controlled, yet heavy enough to freeze the air. Do you know who I am? The words didn't come out sharp. They didn't carry anger. They carried truth. Truth so unshakable that it demanded recognition. The guard's hand dropped instantly, his brow furrowing as though his instincts screamed at him to stop. The crowd gasped, not at her words, but at the way she said them. Because those 5 syllables weren't desperation. They were authority wrapped in elegance. A woman who didn't need to shout because her existence was already louder than their disbelief. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard, her smile flickering for the first time. She hadn't expected composure. She had expected begging, denial, maybe even rage. But this unnerving serenity, was something she didn't know how to fight. The whispers around them grew restless. What does she mean? Who is she? Phones tilted higher, capturing the exact moment the energy shifted. Maya didn't flinch, didn't blink. She let the silence stretch, her question hanging like a riddle none of them could solve. And for the first time that night, the yacht didn't feel like Vanessa's stage. It felt like Maya's. The silence stretched too long. For a moment, Vanessa Cole looked rattled, her carefully crafted poise cracking at the edges. The guard's hesitation only made it worse. He had stepped back half a pace, waiting, uncertain, as though Maya's question had shifted the entire script. And that was when Vanessa snapped. Her voice rose, sharper now, brittle where it had once been polished. "Don't pull that card with me," she hissed, though the words were loud enough for half the yacht to hear. "You people are always looking for a way in, always pretending you belong." The phrase detonated across the deck. Glasses stilled midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the waves slapping the hull seemed to pause. The crowd had been comfortable with subtle humiliation, with whispered judgments. But this was naked prejudice. It was the kind of sentence you can't unsay, the kind that burns the room around it. A man near the bar set down his drink without sipping. A woman in heels turned her face away, as though not hearing it could absolve her. Phones didn't just hover now, they locked in, capturing the words verbatim. A live-stream comment thread lit up with shocked emojis. Everyone had heard, and no one spoke. Maya's expression didn't change. Not anger, not shock, just stillness. She let Vanessa's words hang in the air, exposing themselves for what they were. She didn't need to argue. Prejudice, when spoken plainly, destroys itself. The hostess didn't know it yet, but in that instant, she'd already lost. And I want to ask you, if someone ever spat out words like that at you, would you walk away or would you stand your ground? Comment below, stay if you'd hold firm, or go if you'd walk out with dignity. There's no wrong answer, only truth. Because Maya wasn't leaving, not now, not ever. The venom of Vanessa's words still hung in the air like smoke after a firework. Ugly, lingering, impossible to ignore. The crowd shuffled, restless, their faces pale with the knowledge that they'd just witnessed a line crossed too far. But Vanessa? She stood taller, mistaking the silence for victory. And then Maya moved. Not with fury, not with haste, but with the deliberate calm of someone who no longer had anything to prove. She lowered the envelope back into her clutch, folded her hands neatly in front of her, and spoke in a voice so steady it cut sharper than any shout. "Call your event manager," Maya said, her words measured, each one landing like a weight against the polished deck. She let the pause breathe, her gaze locked directly on Vanessa's trembling smile. Then she added, quiet but absolute, "Tell them the investor just arrived." The air shifted. Gasps broke out like sparks. "Investor?" someone whispered near the piano. "Did she say investor?" Another leaned toward their partner. "Wait, what does that mean?" The whispers grew louder, overlapping, rolling across the deck in waves of disbelief. Vanessa's eyes widened. For the first time all evening, her posture faltered. She blinked rapidly, as though trying to calculate what had just been said, what it implied, and how it threatened the performance she had so carefully staged. The security guard froze, his gaze flicking between the two women, no longer sure who held authority. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted. Not because Maya raised her voice, not because she demanded it, but because truth, spoken plainly, has a way of rearranging a room. The investor wasn't outside the list. She was the list, and everyone felt it. Vanessa's hand twitched, the clipboard suddenly heavier than it had ever been. For a split second, she looked around for backup. Someone, anyone, to confirm what she wanted to believe. But no one moved. Every guest, every pair of eyes had shifted from Maya to her. The stage she built to humiliate now turned into her own spotlight. Her smile cracked. With fingers trembling ever so slightly, she reached for her phone. The silver case glinted under the deck lights as she dialed quickly, her voice forced into a brittle, cheerful tone. "Hi, yes," she said too loudly. "This is Vanessa Cole from the charter event on Deck 7. I have a situation. There's a woman here claiming to be an investor, but her name doesn't appear on my list." A pause. Silence thickened. Vanessa's lips tightened as the voice on the other end responded. Her eyes darted, her throat bobbed. "Yes, I understand," she stammered. Another pause, longer. And then the crack widened. "No, I hadn't checked the updated list," she admitted quietly, her voice shrinking. "I assumed." That single word, assumed, slipped out like a confession. The crowd heard it. They didn't need to hear the voice on the other end. That one word was enough. Vanessa's complexion drained. Her perfectly rehearsed posture faltered. Finally, she lowered the phone, forcing a smile that looked more like defeat. Her voice wavered as she said, "Dr. Washington, please forgive the mix-up. You're, of course, more than welcome." And just like that, the roles reversed. Vanessa was the one asking permission. The crowd murmured, ripples of recognition spreading across the deck. Maya didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because sometimes the loudest victory is silence. It happened almost instantly, the shift. Moments earlier, the guests had been whispering, smirking, sipping their drinks with the smug certainty that Maya Washington was an outsider about to be escorted away. Now those same eyes that dismissed her were wide with recognition, with the dawning horror that they had just played the wrong side of the story. A man in a tailored navy jacket, the same one who had muttered, "This is going to be awkward," cleared his throat and turned his body toward Maya, as though he'd been on her side all along. His face forced into something resembling respect, he lifted his glass slightly, a clumsy attempt at a toast. The woman in crimson silk, who had whispered, "She's not even dressed for this," stood abruptly, smoothing her gown as if wiping away her own words. With a smile so sweet it bordered on desperation, she gestured toward her table. "Dr. Washington," she said warmly now, "please, would you like to take my seat? It has the best view of the harbor." Around them, the murmurs multiplied. "Wait, that's the Washington? The one who owns the logistics firm? I read about her deal with HarborLex. She practically built this industry." Suddenly, Maya wasn't invisible. She was the center of gravity, and every guest was being pulled into her orbit. But Maya didn't rush to claim the attention. She didn't accept the offers thrown at her feet. She didn't reach for the seat in crimson silk. Instead, she gave a polite nod, her calm composure intact, and walked past without a word. Because dignity doesn't need validation, and silence, when carried with grace, speaks louder than flattery. In that moment, every guest on the yacht realized the truth. The woman they tried to erase was the very reason they were there. The crimson silk woman's offer hung in the air like a gilded olive branch, her voice trembling with a sweetness too polished to be sincere. For a second, the entire yacht seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if Maya Washington would accept the seat. But Maya didn't. She let her gaze rest gently on the chair, then lifted her eyes back to the woman with a faint smile, polite, measured, impossible to misinterpret. And then she walked past, not hurried, not dismissive, simply steady, deliberate steps that carried her deeper into the crowd, leaving the offer behind like a relic of a past that no longer held power. It was a refusal, but not one wrapped in arrogance. She didn't gloat, didn't sneer, didn't weaponize her authority. Her silence carried a heavier message. "I don't need your validation to sit at your table. I bring the table with me wherever I go." The effect was seismic. Guests shifted uncomfortably, caught between shame and awe. A man who had chuckled earlier now stared into his drink, as though the reflection might erase his laughter. Another woman lowered her phone, embarrassed to be caught recording the very moment she had dismissed as unworthy minutes ago. Vanessa Cole, still clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, watched helplessly as the room rearranged itself, not around her, but around Maya. The stage she had built to humiliate had become the stage of her own undoing. And Maya, she didn't need to bask in their reversal. By walking past that chair, she showed something more powerful than dominance. She showed restraint. Because true authority isn't about seizing the throne when it's offered. It's about proving you never needed it in the first place. The murmurs rippled across the deck like restless waves. Faces turned, some eager, some ashamed, all tethered to the same gravity. Maya Washington's. She didn't ask for their attention, but she held it now, effortlessly. And then, with the same calm precision she had shown all evening, Maya reached into the inner pocket of her jacket. The crowd tensed. What was she reaching for? Another invitation? A phone? Proof? What emerged was smaller, simpler, more devastating. A dark leather card case, elegant but worn at the edges from use, not display. She opened it slowly, without flourish, as though she were retrieving something as ordinary as a handkerchief. But when her hand came back into view, she was holding a single black card embossed with gold. No name, no number. Just a logo. The logo was enough. It caught the light, sharp and unmistakable. An older gentleman near the piano saw it first, and the sound that escaped him was involuntary, a sharp gasp that silenced even the whispering. That's the founding investor card, he muttered, his voice breaking the air like a cymbal crash. The reaction spread instantly. Heads turned. Guests craned their necks. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. Another whispered furiously to her companion, "You can't even get one of those unless you built the company itself." Vanessa Cole's face drained of color. Her clipboard dipped slightly, as if the weight of the revelation pulled her arm down. She stared at the card like it had teeth, like it might bite away the last scrap of authority she still clung to. Maya didn't gloat. She didn't wave it. She simply held it, quiet and steady, letting the truth speak louder than her voice ever could. Because real power doesn't need explanation. It only needs to be seen. The golden logo still shimmered faintly in Maya Washington's hand, a quiet thunderclap that had already cracked the night open. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. With graceful steps, Maya walked toward the front of the yacht. The crowd parted instinctively, as though pulled aside by invisible strings. No one dared to stop her. Even Vanessa Cole, once the center of attention, stood rooted in place, her clipboard pressed uselessly to her chest. Near the stage, a young coordinator froze, clutching a microphone too large for her hands. When Maya reached her, she didn't ask. She simply extended her palm. The coordinator blinked once, then handed it over without a word, recognizing authority when she saw it. Maya turned to face the guests. She didn't pace. She didn't gesture wildly. She simply stood, the microphone held like fragile glass, her composure unbroken. And then she spoke. "If the person in charge of tonight's guest list is here," she said evenly, her voice carrying across the deck without strain, "I'd like them to explain why your primary investor was nearly thrown off this yacht." The sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Gasps fluttered across the crowd, sharp inhales, muttered curses, the clink of a glass hitting a table too quickly. No one dared to respond. No one dared to defend Vanessa. Phones shot higher now, recording openly. This wasn't a secret anymore. It was history unfolding, and every guest knew it. Maya let the silence stretch. Her eyes swept across the deck, not seeking approval, not demanding pity, just waiting. Because she knew the truth didn't need her to shout. It only needed her to stand. And in that silence, the yacht itself seemed to bow. The deck was silent, trembling with anticipation. Dozens of eyes fixed on Maya Washington, waiting to see if her words would hold. Vanessa Cole's lips were pressed into a brittle smile, her knuckles white against the clipboard. The air was electric, thick with the weight of judgment. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply slid her phone from her clutch with the same composure she'd shown all night. The crowd leaned forward as she tapped one contact and set it on speaker. Her thumb hovered just long enough to let the silence grow unbearable, then pressed. A crisp voice answered almost instantly. "This is Elena Caraway, Director of Events for Harbor Lex Global. How can I—" "Elena," Maya said, calm, unhurried. "It's Dr. Washington. Just wanted you to know I'm here." There was a pause. Then Elena's voice burst through the speakers, full of warmth and urgency. "Dr. Washington, of course. We saw your name checked in earlier. Thank you so much for attending tonight. The entire event has been approved and funded by your foundation. Are you enjoying the evening?" The words hit the deck like thunder. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered against the teak floor, but no one bent to pick it up, because no one could move. Every guest had heard it. Every whisper, every doubt, every smirk was obliterated in an instant. Vanessa's face turned ghostly pale. The clipboard slipped slightly in her hand. She blinked rapidly, but nothing could erase the sound of Elena's voice confirming, in front of everyone, exactly who Maya was. Maya ended the call with a gentle smile. "No issues, Elena. Thank you." Click, and that was it. Truth delivered. Public, undeniable. The yacht would never breathe the same way again. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ocean lapping against the hull, as if even the sea was holding its breath. Vanessa Cole stood at the center of it all, her clipboard clutched so tightly it might snap in half. The poise she had worn like armor only minutes ago was gone, replaced by a brittle facade that cracked more with every second of silence. Her throat bobbed. She tried to smile, but it looked like a mask slipping off under stage lights. I I hope you understand," she stammered, her voice higher now, thinned by panic. "There was never any intention to." But no one was listening. The crowd that once whispered with her now whispered about her. Heads turned, not toward Maya anymore, but toward Vanessa, watching her unravel. A man who had laughed earlier avoided eye contact, turning away as though distance could erase complicity. A woman lowered her glass carefully to the table, her eyes downcast, ashamed she had once giggled at Maya's expense. Even the security guard shifted awkwardly, stepping back into the shadows, no longer her enforcer. Vanessa's words tripped over themselves, her apology dissolving into the night air. "Please, Dr. Washington, forgive the—" She cut herself off, realizing too late that the formality sounded hollow, desperate. And then the silence betrayed her. It wasn't Maya who condemned her. It was the absence of belief. The crowd no longer saw authority when they looked at her. They saw performance, weakness, failure. The hostess who thought she owned the room was now its prisoner, exposed under the weight of her own arrogance. Because when truth finally speaks, the mask of power always falls first. At first, the silence felt endless. Vanessa Cole stood trembling at the center, her smile cracked, her clipboard drooping like a shield no one respected. The crowd avoided her eyes, their earlier smirks now burned into shame. And in that vacuum of noise, something unexpected happened. A sound, soft, hesitant, broke the stillness. Clap. It came from the far side of the deck, a single pair of hands meeting once, then again. Heads turned. The man in the tailored navy jacket, the same one who had whispered judgment earlier, now wore a stiff expression, as though applause might erase his silence before. Another guest joined in, then another. The claps multiplied, not thunderous, not celebratory, but steady, an acknowledgement. Recognition that a wrong had unfolded in plain sight, and the woman they tried to erase had endured it with more grace than anyone deserved. Maya didn't bow. She didn't even smile. She stood quietly, accepting nothing, demanding nothing. Her stillness told them everything. This applause wasn't for her victory. It was for their conscience waking up too late. Vanessa's face drained further as the sound grew. Applause that should have been for her hosting now crowned Maya instead. The shift was undeniable. The yacht no longer belonged to the hostess. It belonged to the woman she had tried to humiliate. And though the clapping never reached the frenzy of celebration, it carried something heavier: respect. Respect earned not through anger, not through shouting, but through the kind of dignity that turns humiliation into revelation. And if you believe dignity is louder than cruelty, hit subscribe right now. Stories like Maya's prove that true strength doesn't need to scream, it simply stands. The applause lingered like a soft echo, filling the deck with a tension that was no longer cruel but reflective. Guests slowly lowered their hands, the sound tapering into silence, leaving behind the undeniable truth of what had just unfolded. Maya Washington didn't move to the center. She didn't need to. She turned her head slightly, just enough to let her calm gaze fall back on Vanessa Cole. And then, with a voice even and unshaken, she spoke the line that would haunt the hostess long after the lights of the yacht went dark. "Not everyone gets a second chance to make a first impression." The words struck harder than any accusation. They weren't shouted. They weren't laced with venom. They were delivered with the quiet precision of a scalpel, clean, undeniable, final. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some glanced at Vanessa with pity, others with disdain. But all of them understood the weight of Maya's words. It wasn't just a reminder of the humiliation Vanessa had staged. It was a verdict, and it was one that could never be overturned. Vanessa's lips parted, but no reply came. What defense could she give? That she hadn't meant it, that it was a mistake. The room already knew better. She stood frozen, clipboard hanging uselessly at her side, a once commanding presence reduced to silence. Maya, on the other hand, didn't linger. She didn't demand further apologies or savor Vanessa's collapse. Her message had been delivered, sharp and unforgettable, and the dignity with which she left it behind spoke louder than any victory lap ever could. Because sometimes the most powerful punishment isn't humiliation. It's the reminder that grace remembers, even when it forgives. When the last echo of applause faded, the yacht seemed strangely quiet. The glasses, the music, even the hum of conversation, all of it receded into background noise. Dr. Maya Washington stepped away from the crowd, her heels clicking softly against the deck, carrying her toward the railing where the city lights shimmered across the dark water. She rested her hand on the polished rail and let the night air wash over her. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and champagne, but underneath it all was something heavier: memory. She thought of every room she had walked into, where eyes calculated her worth before she spoke a word. Every boardroom where her presence was questioned, every contract where she had been asked to prove herself twice as much for half the recognition. Tonight wasn't just about one hostess with a clipboard. It was about a system built on silent assumptions, on invisible lines drawn long before she ever arrived. And yet tonight proved something else too. Power doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it stands still, patient, until the room has no choice but to see it. Her calmness hadn't been weakness. It had been strategy. Her silence hadn't been surrender. It had been strength. Maya inhaled deeply, her eyes on the horizon. She realized that what happened tonight wasn't just her victory. It was a mirror held up to everyone on that deck. A mirror reflecting who had whispered, who had laughed, who had stayed silent. The city skyline glittered in the distance. But for Maya Washington, the brightest light was the truth that had just unfolded on that yacht. She stood tall against the night, her reflection rippling faintly in the dark water below. And she thought about all the people who had ever been told they didn't belong. She knew tonight wasn't just about her. It was about every barrier that had tried to shrink her, every voice that had tried to erase her, every silence that had tried to suffocate her worth. And yet, she was still here, stronger, seen, unshaken. Turning back to face the crowd, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words flowed like calm water, steady and undeniable. Never let anyone decide your worth. Not the clothes you wear, not the color of your skin, not the background you came from. You are more than their assumptions, more than their whispers, more than the limits they try to place on you. The guests stood frozen, their earlier arrogance stripped away, their silence now transformed into listening. Phones that once recorded for spectacle now recorded for witness. Maya continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up, stand tall, be yourself, and let your presence rewrite the story. The words resonated deeper than any rebuke could. They weren't just for the crowd on that yacht. They were for everyone who had ever felt small in a room that wanted them invisible. And to you watching this right now, remember, Black women belong everywhere. If these words speak to you, share this video so someone else hears it too. Let the world know you are enough. The night air wrapped softly around the deck as the final words left Maya Washington's lips. For a heartbeat, the entire yacht stood frozen, as though suspended in the truth she had just spoken. The guests, those who had smirked, whispered, or stayed silent, now looked at her with something new. Not pity, not guilt, respect. Maya turned once more toward the water, her silhouette framed against the glittering skyline of Los Angeles. The reflection of the city danced across the waves, fractured and brilliant, just like her journey. 10 years ago, she had watched yachts like this sail away without her. Tonight, she had reminded an entire room that she was not just a guest. She was the foundation they stood on. She drew in a steady breath, the salt air filling her lungs, and allowed herself the smallest smile. It wasn't the smile of revenge, nor of triumph. It was the quiet, knowing smile of someone who understood her worth had never been in question, except in the eyes of those too blind to see it. The crowd remained hushed, still processing the lesson written in their own silence. Vanessa Cole, clipboard drooping by her side, no longer commanded a stage. The spotlight had shifted permanently, and she was left in the shadows of her own making. Maya turned back toward the audience, not just the ones on the yacht, but the ones watching now, through every recording, every live stream, every retelling. And her final words weren't just for them, they were for you. Remember this, you belong. No one gets to decide otherwise. If this story moved you, drop one word in the comments that describes how you feel right now. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this, stories that remind us of the power of dignity and the strength of Black women, are just the beginning. Share this video so someone else remembers. They belong too.